So thank you for inviting me, Peter, to the conference. Again, it's always a great pleasure to be involved. And my name is Richard Barker, a board member of the International Sustainability Standards Board. And my role today is to update you on the current status of the board's work and what we're currently thinking about. So this is an update on this time last year. The following slide summarizes our work plan up until 2026. So this is based upon an agenda consultation that we previously carried out. There will be another one that will determine our work plan beyond 2026, which is a formal part of our due process. So what you see at the top of the pyramid here, the most important part of our work, is supporting the implementation of S1 and S2. So S1, the general requirements standard that requires entities disclose all sustainability-related risks and opportunities, or material information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that affect financial prospects. So S1 is the mother standard, right? It covers everything. It's all, whether it's environmental, whether it's social, whatever it happens to be, it's all a required disclosure in S1. And then S2, which of course is our climate standard building on TCFD. So and S2 is applied in the context of S1. So those are our two standards. The standards are sufficient to provide a complete set of sustainability-related financial disclosure. At the same time, market practice, of course, remains very young, developing, especially as increasingly the standards become mandatory in different jurisdictions. The urgency to learn and for assurers to learn how to assure and so on, and for all stakeholders to become familiar with the process. The urgency for that is increasing, but we're still some way off having established norms in this space so that entities understand what is required of them. They can see what their peers are doing and so on. So implementing S1 and S2, building capacity, supporting adoption, those are the critical areas for us to be working on right now. Below that, the lighter blue boxes, there are two work streams that run in parallel and are of equal importance in our agenda. The one on the left, new research projects, concerns two broad areas of work, if you like, human and natural. One is human capital, and the other is biodiversity, ecosystem and ecosystem services, or more broadly, nature. The work in that space is towards standard setting, towards ISSB standards, S3 and S4, if you like, though we haven't made a decision about what to do yet. So formally, as part of our decision-making process, we have to go through a research phase. Not a research phase in the sense that academia would use the term, but a research phase in terms of scoping and determining what should be the substance of a new standard, what should be essentially the scope of a new standard. So a decision will be made towards the end of this year on both of those projects on whether to go ahead formally with a standard setting project on nature and or on human capital. The other block here, enhancing SASB standards, is a much more both immediate and incremental process. So we have inherited the SASB standards. They are part of the intellectual property of IFRS. S1 and S2 both require industry-based disclosure. They both require that preparers, entities, refer to and consider the SASB standards, but they don't require the application of the SASB standards. The reason being that the SASB standards are not formally IFRS standards. They have not been through IFRS due process. So they're an incredibly helpful guide. They're the only industry-based standards out there, an incredibly helpful guide to preparers in reporting industry-based disclosures. Now, what we've decided to do with the SASB standards is a process of enhancement, focusing on priority industries in the first instance. So we've just issued exposure drafts for 9 SASB standards, and there are, I'll show you the list shortly. And there are 3 others that are in the pipeline by the end of the year. In addition, in the process of going through the enhancing of those standards, that we have made proposing to make, as it were, consequential amendments to across 41 other industries in the 77 industry architecture of the SASB standards. So this is quite a significant step forward in terms of updating, internationalizing, and aligning with the logic and the language of S1 and S2. This process does not take us to ISSB industry standards. These remain SASB standards at this point. So even when they've gone through the enhancement process, they will remain standards that preparers are required to refer to and consider only at this stage. That said, I think this is a really important development. So if you compare the research projects with the SASB projects in those two sort of parallel work streams we have, the research projects are inherently longer term in nature. They will lead to industry standards. Sorry, they will lead to IFRS standards. But they will do so eventually once we've been through the process of writing the standards and going through the exposure process and so on and so forth. So it will take a while. The industry standards are both more immediate in the sense that they build on existing industry standards, and also that they are very focused, right? So if you think about S1, S2, they're very broad, hence the need for implementation guidance for those standards. The SASB standards, by comparison, are intended to be a focus on these are issues on which entities ought to be providing material information, all things considered. So again, they're a guide only, but are very focused, industry specific on particular topics, particular themes, particular questions, particular metrics. So the potential to influence, to shape market practice and the direction of travel in sustainability reporting is high on these standards, and they are in issue now. They are being exposed for comment for 150 days. So they're going through the regular IFRS comment period process in that sense, but with an additional 30 days above the norm, because there's quite a lot of material here. Actually, there's a number of different industries that we're exposing for comment. So we hope and expect to have considerable feedback into this process from industry, from investors, and from other stakeholders. Ideally, to make sure that we've covered all of the really important metrics that apply at those industry-specific levels. So that's broadly speaking the current work plan. Underpinning all of that, there are these three boxes at the bottom: connectivity, stakeholder engagement, and interoperability. Connectivity speaks to, in particular, the connection between sustainability-related financial disclosure and the financial statements. It's becoming increasingly obvious that there are all sorts of overlaps and connections between financial statement disclosure and ISSB standards disclosure within financial reporting. And so that's becoming an increasingly important part of our work, both at the ISSB and the IASB. It's also, of course, critical to our role globally that we are the sister board of the dominant global standard setter for financial accounting. Now, at the bottom right, interoperability, of course, also hugely important as we build out the global baseline for sustainability reporting and do so alongside other standard setters in the space. So particularly important here, I would call out GRI. GRI, very, very widely used globally, first mover in this space, but with a different emphasis than we have. So GRI is focused on impact for all stakeholders, and we're focused on reporting of risks and opportunities for investors. So those things very closely relate one to the other, but they are trying to do different things. And so it makes sense, actually, to the extent that there is market demand for both of those different activities, it makes sense that the standards are not the same, but that where they overlap, they do so efficiently. They do so without duplication of effort. So that's interoperability in that context. A very important development in that space is that GRI has just issued a revised climate standard, and they have announced that the use of emissions data as reported under IFRS S2 will be deemed to satisfy the reporting requirements of the GRI standard in that regard. So a very powerful statement of the way in which we're working together. Less obvious will be that we have extensively used GRI disclosures in thinking about how we develop the SASB standards. So this is a two-way, mutually supportive relationship cemented in an MOU between the two. The other key development, other key interoperability body in this space is ESRS. ESRS is in a state of flux and change right now. The CSRD will not be developed to include sector reporting, which fits well with SASB standards becoming the global baseline for sector reporting. But it's somewhat too early to say quite where ESRS will land. But in general, and as I'll show on the next slide, the progress of the global baseline is super encouraging, and our consistent message to all jurisdictions is that everyone is better off if we're on the same page. The middle box, stakeholder engagement, I think is more or less a given. That for us, working closely with all of our stakeholders is critical in all that we do. So that's a high-level overview of the work that we are doing. And let me just say a couple of things here about the support of S1 and S2. The first is that adoption is so critical for us right now. So we remain a young standard-setting organisation seeking quickly to adopt a global baseline and thankfully able to build on the foundation of the ISSB in that respect. We have recently announced published jurisdictional profiles for all of these jurisdictions. There's 36 in this list, I think. These are the jurisdictions which have either already mandated the adoption of ISSB standards or are in the final stages of consultation and similar on doing so. So a huge amount of progress across different geographies and across different scales of jurisdictions. And you can see some really important jurisdictions on that list. So the rate of adoption is actually super encouraging right now. In a sense, that's not, speaking as a member of the standard setting board, that's not standard setting activity so much as ensuring that there is adoption of our standards. So a really important part of what we're doing is adoption and educational capacity building and so on, in addition to setting standards. On that issue of education and capacity, we're doing a lot of training and education and so on, for example, working with the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. And we've issued a series of educational material publications, of which I've pulled out 3 here, which I think illustrate the kind of work that we're doing in this space. So, and all 3, I think, are valuable reads for anyone wanting to understand how to apply our standards. So the first one is a discussion of, well, look, what are sustainability-related risks and opportunities? How should we think about them? And what comprises of material information to disclose about them? So a pretty thorough sort of build on S1 in particular and also on S2 in terms of understanding the frame of what we're asking entities to report. The second about transition plan. So transition planning is a core theme in climate, of course. The UK created something called a Transition Plan Task Force, which was by design something that built on S2, that was intended not to be a UK specific venture, but to have global applicability. And so the idea was to build out materials to help entities in disclosing information about transition planning. That was a finite life project, much like TCFD. And again, like TCFD, we have taken on the work of that task force. And this publication, which just came out, is about how to report on the transition planning of an entity in line with the requirements of S2. So again, this is part of our role to consolidate standards, frameworks, guidance, and so on globally in support of the global baseline. The third bullet here is it sits alongside the EDs that have just come out, and it's an explanation of how to think about and apply the SASB standards alongside the ISSB standards. So what formal role is there for industry-based disclosure, and how should the SASB standards be thought of and applied in that context? So, for example, if you're you're an existing SASB preparer and you're adopting ISSB standards and you want to know, well, how does what I've already got fit with a broader requirement to report under ISSB, this is the guide for you. So a lot of educational material that's being produced. And this is the SASB standards that I mentioned earlier. You can see these are industries where there are significant sustainability related risks and opportunities for investors, and therefore industries in which industry-based information is really important from an investor point of view. So they're good. They're good test cases, as it were, for the whole of the 77 SASB industries. And as I mentioned, by going through some of these industries and thinking about making metrics within them consistent, we've also thought through consequential moments for other industries across the SASB universe, as it were. 3 of these are not in the current EDs. That's the agricultural products, meat, poultry and dairy, and the infrastructure sector, the utilities. Those will come later in the year. The others are already out and ready for comment. And that, I'd say, actually, I highlight that as probably the most important thing to say right now. If you and or stakeholders, industry groups, investor groups, whatever it happens to be, can engage with us in providing comment on the SASB industries, that I think will be the most valuable immediate source of input into our process. That's it from me. I think that gives you a broad summary, I hope, of all the things that the ISSB is doing. And thank you again for inviting me to speak.